Hello to another session here at the Falling Walls Breakthrough Conversations 2021. If you've seen some of the other breakthrough conversations, you'll know that this is an opportunity for us to bring scientists and researchers, science entrepreneurs and policymakers, innovators, everybody closer to you out there, our digital, but let's say hopefully very human audience out there watching while we stream this live. And we are hoping on your interaction as we get into this conversation. We have now Huiming Bu, who is an expert in, let's say, computing power at IBM Research.
Semiconductor engineering.
With your microphone, semiconductor engineering.
Yes.
I'm trying to simplify things for for idiots like myself. But we'll get into the specifics in just a second. So we're very happy to have Huiming Bu here. We are going to talk about his work, his research, for a brief time, and hopefully at least, let's say 10 minutes, 15 minutes in, you'll come in with your questions. Now, how this works, because you're on Zoom, if you want to ask a question, please use the raise your hand function. Hopefully you're all acquainted with that. You'll be spotlighted and then unmuted at the given time, and we'll ask you to ask your question. It's on audio, and you should be aware that this is being recorded. It will be available later on. So if you'd like to mention your first name, that's okay. Otherwise, if you'd like to keep a bit of anonymity, then do that as well. If you've got any problems, write a quick message in the chat, and our support team, technical team, will help you out with that. I think I've mentioned all the things that I need to in the off. So how about we get into this now?
Sure.
We've got 25 minutes to get to grips with your breakthrough endeavors in semiconductor science and engineering at IBM Research. How about we start at the 30,000 feet level, and I ask you, what is your breakthrough? Why are you here?
Yes, glad to be here for the Science Summit. And in fact, the breakthrough is about a new device architecture called nanosheet to replace today's mainstream FinFET. And this is a new device structure. We have built a new 2-nanometer tester chip, the world's first one, based on this technology. It will change the next decade of the semiconductor chip power performance landscape.
I have to be quite transparent here. I mean, one of the briefing notes that I got for our conversation here at Falling Walls was that it's you're faced with the challenge of constantly dealing with Moore's law, and I'm wondering, how do you break a law that essentially is not a law? I mean, it was when it was proposed, it was a hypothesis, an observation that computing power in its simplest form or its processing power would double every 2 years. We're actually seeing, I think, that it's the advances are even faster than that. So every 18 months or even more than that, every 12 months perhaps. So how do you face that, and why is it important that whether you're an expert or somebody who just uses a computer or a smartwatch or whatever in your daily life, that you need to worry about processing power?
Well, obviously you're very well prepared, and it's a great question. I'll start by saying that so-called Moore's law essentially is Gordon Moore presented in 1965. What he said essentially is the number of transistors on integrated circuits doubles every 2 years. And it was very interesting. When we said so, the world only had about 50 transistors on the same chip, 50. And it's also interesting, when you look back, like what you have said, Moore's law is really not about a law of physics, nothing even close. It is a law of observation and a projection into the future based on a historical trend. It's more like a self-fulfilling philosophy. So what is the real question is what are the innovations that have happened in the last, let's say, between 50 to 60 years, which has made this happen? Because today's best technology, if you look at a computer chip, It has billions of transistors in it. That is the power of the power law.
Okay. Sorry to be so typical. If you can try to keep the microphone in one place and near your mouth, that'll be great. But
Okay.
now I have to go back to what I was thinking, because that's actually fascinating what you were just saying. I mean, in the idea of a self-fulfilling prophecy almost suggests that the digitalized world that we have today is merely a dream of certain engineers, technologists who wanted to see something, and we're sort of fulfilling that. I mean, I know if you look at things like science fiction, a lot of the science fiction writers were engineers, computer scientists who had a projection, and they've gone about developing and creating that projection. When you come to this work, what are you doing? Are you coming with your own projections, or are you trying to sort of like build on other people's projections? If you see what I'm trying to say, is it, where do you come into the science?
It's always a mix, by the way. There's no right or wrong answer in what you have asked. Maybe I share with a little bit of my personal experience
Please.
on this topic.
Absolutely.
So when I look at this, yes, it is a self-fulfilling prophecy, but also it's one of those fields that I would say the scientists and engineers, they're really working together, building their future how they see in the past. This is really an amazing journey in the last, I would say, 50 to 60 years. What I want to point out, maybe a couple of things. One is you always, I mean, we are all busy with our daily job, right? But it will always be good to spend some time from time to time, think about what is the next big thing. What is the next big thing in the next decade? Not just in your daily work, but in your whole industry and in our society. And think about where you want to focus on innovation. Second one I want to mention, which is directly related to what you have asked, is talk to your partners, talk to your clients, to hear about their pain points, to understand what the industry, what the society truly wants. Innovate where it matters. And by doing that, at the end of the day, once you are successful in your innovation, in your investment, you know you're going to have an impact. Impact to the business, impact on the society, and what's more, you have a way to actually scale up your business because that breakthrough in your innovation.
Again, you sort of get these things firing off in my head. I actually wanted to ask you a question that is actually directly related to sort of your technology, but I have to sort of ask you this first of all, and that is whether you believe that there is a divide between what's happening in the laboratories, what's happening, in the community of engineers and out there. I mean, our vision of the future, if you ask somebody who's not directly involved in semiconductors, if somebody says, make a projection, what is the future? Where is the future? What would you say is the future? Like, if you had to name a number on a how many years? What are you dreaming of?
I'm optimistic first, okay?
Yeah.
When we look at the evolution of our digital world, for a very simple reason, because it is need-driven. Look at the data we have generated in today's society. It is on the exponential growth. What does it mean? It means the explosion of data will drive the need of economics to address that data, to analyzing data, to use that data. It means the exponential increase in computing power needed. It also drives the innovation needed to exponentially support that growing power. So I'm very optimistic. And if I look at, let's say, use 1989 as an example,
Yeah.
that's why we're here for this conference. And I was never thought about I would have a personal computer back then.
Yeah.
When I was in middle school, running my 1.5K running test. I qualified for that, of course, at that point of time. But I was never able to imagine a world. You have smartphone, you can connect with anyone in the world across globally, I would say, instantly, without any delay. I would never have imagined that about 30 years ago, but it happened. And the other day, I was talking to my son, who was in his 15, now going into 16. I said, you know, when your mom and me getting older, we need the robotics at home. We need something to take care of us, or maybe someone to take care of us at that point of time. And maybe that's something you would be interested in working on in the future. Yeah. He's extremely good at math and at the programming. That's the reason I started to plant, unfortunately, yes, for engineer life. Yeah. But I started to plant a seed in his mind. And he's very excited about the opportunity. Well, the other thing he's working on is, hey, you know what? I'm interested in working on the medicine, to getting people to live to its potential in the expectation in the age of 120, 125. That's another thing in his mind. But you know what? I cannot predict his life, predict his future. But I think the future is bright.
But I mean, that's what I'm sort of like heading to as well, because or what I was thinking of, you know, you mentioned 89, the reference to falling walls, of course, the 9th of November, the fall of the Berlin Wall, so that's why we're here, in a sense, or why it's a falling walls. But, you know, when we think about Y2K, back in the day when personal computing first came up, nobody imagined that we'd have computers that would be around at the year 2000. Right, okay. If I look at a scientist at Cornell Medicine University, I forget the name now, but Chris Mason, he's projecting 500 years in the future. Our next 500 years on Earth and in space and Mars and all the rest of it. So it's sort of like the ideas of what is the future are quite, so, you know, will probably have to inform what you do right now. So you mentioned your son's life will go into what the, you know, the 2080s, 2090s perhaps, and beyond, you know. What about the next century? Before I ask you to come in on that, I'm going to turn to camera again and ask you out there whether you've got any questions. And we have a question. That's amazing. How about we just turn to our questioning party straight away, since I've already turned this direction, on the screen. Please, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm Saskia, and my question is that you were talking about the next big thing in industry, and I wonder if the current problems with the supply difficulties affect your research for the next big thing. Like I was thinking about the problems there. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. It's actually a very important question, dear in my heart. Before I came here, I would say yes and no. The yes part is definitely the whole semiconductor industry supply chain has been affected by COVID-19, as many of you have heard about a chip shortage. This is not just happening in the US, but I would say across the world, we're having that challenge, right? And many companies, institutes are working together to address that. The side of the story, I would say no, is actually very interesting to share. I do run a 724 fab in Albany, which we have about 300 engineers and technicians working around the clock, 7/24 for that fab. In fact, I'm very happy to say today that from a productivity perspective, that fab has been running within 90% compared to prior to COVID-19, thanks to people's dedication from the research community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, thank you very much for your question. An interesting question. I presume also sort of like, you know, shortages would affect not only production, but also the research. And IBM is, you know, has been at the forefront of artificial intelligence, machine learning, but also quantum computing. So, you know, so if again, talking about where is the future for you, I mean, what do you think is like, you know, for people out there, for people coming into careers, if we want to sort of inspire people to come into engineering, such as your son, or people of other genders who want to come into this, you know, where should they be projecting their dreams and their visions for their research areas? Should it be in personal computing, or should it be more on industrial levels? And should we be projecting since I already mentioned Mars, off-planet computing. I mean, that's very important, getting more important.
Well, I'm optimistic, but doesn't mean that I can see the future for the next 20 to 30 years. But this is what I can say. IBM Research, or IBM as an organization, as a corporate, we are very focused on the future of computing. So, as you have said, we're very much focused on semiconductor technology, which is for today's bits technology, which is essentially today's foundation for computers. We are also working on the next technology, really on the cloud and the AI, as you have mentioned, as it is picking up its momentum exponentially in our society. As I mentioned, the exponential growth of the data and the data processing power. And the third piece is the quantum. Quantum technology, I would say one thing today, is not a technology we're talking about 20 years from now. It's going to get into our industry. It's going to affect our life very soon in the next few years. And IBM has a path to deliver that.
Okay, so, because obviously as a journalist, I'm concerned that this is all IBM, and of course you are IBM, but I mean, how does IBM work with other companies and interested parties in the community? Because we are talking about challenges that affect everybody, and I think no one company, no matter how big they are, can handle what we're talking about. I mean, I appreciate you're talking about not wanting to project further than a couple of years or whatever, beyond 20 years.
Yes.
But I mean, with the work that IBM has done over the decades, sure, there would be huge projection. It could not have happened without collaboration.
That's right.
Yeah. So how does that work? How do we sort of encourage does it have to be not necessarily faster breakthroughs, but more consolidated breakthroughs that also, that do benefit everybody out there, and things and an issue that's dear to my heart that people are really truly aware of. Again, we talk a lot about artificial intelligence and machine learning and use the terms interchangeably, but I sort of hazard to be so conceited and think that a lot of people out there don't really get it, but we still click on agree.
Well, Zafika, you bring a very important point. I would say sometimes I'm afraid, actually, especially in the US, a lot of opinions are very divided, not just to the political opinion, but also sometimes in the science field, because it stems from the political opinion. That said, to have the breakthrough of the science that affects our society working together is very, very important. Mm-hmm. Yes, I wear IBM badge. Of course, I did not wear today. I'm an IBMer, but I'm not here to advocate for IBM. I do appreciate that the company has a culture of collaboration. For example, for the nanosheet technology I just talked about, and I want to present in the afternoon, we have shared that result, the progress in the last decade with the whole semiconductor engineering community along the road, and brought the whole world together. And it's in a process, the whole semiconductor industry, in that process to migrate from today's FinFET to nanosheet as the next step, because that activity, because that effort. And personally, when I was a graduate student, I actually took an IBM fellowship. That's actually maybe part of the reason I joined the company later on. The point I'm making here is, in the last 20 years, which I'm aware of, even the company in some years was in very difficult financial situation. They have always dedicated to allocate the money for the fellowship for students.
Yeah.
That's a good example how a company, a corporate, a private company, can be part of the society and help the society on the science mission. And also, especially in Albany, we have an ecosystem working together with semiconductor tool vendors, material suppliers, EDA vendors, and a very, very important university engagement all together to move forward with the science and engineering agenda for semiconductors, of course.
So you mentioned you're in Albany, so you're in the States. Can I ask for our audience as well, where you started out your journey, because I'm keen to know about the idea of international collaboration. I fear that in this sphere there's a lot of talk about international collaboration, but there's a lot of sort of agitation and lack of collaboration with certain countries.
Okay.
So, what's your background? If I
can only speak for my own experience. Okay?
Right, yeah.
I can draw conclusion with your own experience. So I started with college education in Nanjing University in Jiangsu, China.
Yeah.
And I came to the US to Yale in engineering graduate school in 2000. Wow, that just reminded me way back. Okay. And I graduated in 2005, joined IBM Research in TJ Wilson Center, which is also based in New York State. Mm. And I spent 3 years with a key project when the project moved from research to a development and manufacturing site called East Fishkill. IBM used to own it. Mm. I spent 3 years there. And then in 2008, I moved to Albany, which is the capital of New York State, which we have a joint development alliance with many partners I just mentioned. Yeah. And it is an international mission with, last time I counted, it was with like 17 countries participation, literally 17 countries engineers, with a very diverse workforce with scientists and engineers.
So I appreciate it. We've got like 30 seconds or so to go, but I don't want to put you on the spot. But do you think that there is another wall that needs to come down in this area when it comes to collaboration, you know, to sort of take the politics out of engineering, for instance, because we are talking about global advances. I mean, we talk about it a lot, we don't actually do it a lot. You know, even in the pandemic we've seen, we talk about it all the time, we don't actually do it a lot. Is that a wall that needs to come down, that there needs to be greater acknowledgement of what's happening in China and other Asian countries, be it India as well, or other places around the world, where, for political reasons, there's been sort of like people have held back?
Yeah.
Can I dare to ask you your opinion on that?
I'm a scientist, and I'm an engineer, and I'm proud of being a scientist and an engineer. I would say science and engineer, they do not have boundary. And that's how people should work together and advance the technology for our society, for our community across the world, not just for a single country.
Huiming Bu, that's a lovely place to stop. Thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Let me give you a bit of a fist bump. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of you out there. I'm pretty, my head's spinning. That was really quite fascinating. So thank you very much for joining us. Thanks for your interest and for your questions. Huiming Bu here from IBM Research. Stick around for our next Falling Walls breakthrough conversation coming up in about 5 minutes or so. Thank you.
Thank you.